What if I told you that 20 minutes can completely change the way you think, feel, and decide starting today? It is not an exaggeration, nor a beautiful catchphrase. It is reality for those who understand that faith and focus do not come out of nowhere. They are built when you learn to shield your mind, organize your emotions, and align your principles and values. Most people live on automatic, complaining about what they feel, what they missed, and what didn't happen, without realizing that they are feeding exactly what they want to avoid. Maybe you're tired of trusting people and getting frustrated, of creating expectations that never come true, of dealing with crises and injustices that seem to have no end. And in the midst of all this, hope in God is being drowned out by the noise of disorganized emotions, bad company, and voices that only know how to complain. The truth is that no one has taught you how to protect your heart without hardening your soul, nor how to live the Christian life with lightness, trust in God, and perseverance. In these next few minutes, I want to walk with you as someone who has already made mistakes, has fallen, has needed a new beginning, and has learned that spiritual renewal happens when we make conscious choices. Here you'll understand why faith needs focus, why misdirected intimacy drains your energy, and how God's grace and love restore even that which seemed lost. If you stay until the end, you won't leave the same as you entered. You will come out stronger, more aware, and with your heart prepared to live what God is already building in silence. Faith does not work on autopilot. It goes hand in hand with focus, and focus, in turn, is born from the emotions you choose to feed every day. When the mind is scattered, faith weakens without making a sound. Therefore, shielding the mind is a practical decision, not just a spiritual one. If you wake up already complaining, comparing, or anticipating problems, your emotions take over and focus is lost before the day even begins. Think with me, where is your focus when a crisis or an injustice arises? If you run straight to fear, anxiety, or revenge, faith even exists, but it is stifled. Disorganized emotions create internal noise, and noise prevents clarity. A simple practice is to start the day with 5 minutes of silence, reading, and gratitude. Psalms, Proverbs, or even an excerpt from books like Who Thinks Gets Rich help to align thought, emotion, and purpose early on. Focus is also a daily choice. It is not denying feelings, but deciding what will govern your actions. Faith grows when you direct your emotions toward hope in God, even without immediate answers. Perseverance is born from this invisible training, repeated day after day. And the more you master the emotional focus, the more trust in God ceases to be speech and becomes a living experience, making room for the next level of the journey. There is a quiet wisdom in choosing well who walks near you. A few close friends do not mean isolation, but emotional and spiritual protection. All intimacy opens doors, and not everyone knows how to enter without messing up. When you share too much with those who don't share your principles and values, your emotions are exposed, vulnerable, and often confused. Close friends have direct access to your heart, your doubts, your dreams, and even your weaknesses. Therefore, the Christian life teaches that not everyone deserves this level of trust. Bad company doesn't always come across as bad people. Sometimes it's just people who aren't aligned with your faith, your focus, and your vision of the future. A good exercise is to observe after talking to this person. Do you feel strengthened or drained? Shielding the mind involves limiting access. This includes conversations, advice, and even jokes that seem harmless but plant doubt, fear, or complaint. Surrounding yourself with a few close friends who respect your faith and encourage trust in God creates a safe emotional environment. And this quiet care sets the stage for more mature choices, which naturally lead to the next step of your journey. Intimacy is not a quantity of time, it is depth of access. Whoever you let into your most sensitive thoughts ends up directly influencing your emotions. Therefore, being selective is not coldness, it is emotional maturity. When you understand this, you begin to realize that not every connection deserves the same level of openness, especially when your faith and focus are under construction. A lot of people get hurt because they confuse venting with intimacy. Talking too much to the wrong person creates frustration, creates expectations in people, and weakens trust in God. Misdirected intimacy drains energy, distorts decisions, and feeds insecurities. A rule of thumb is simple: notice if that person keeps what you trust in and points you to God or to constant complaining. Emotional healing begins when you organize the accesses to your heart. Healthy intimacy strengthens, brings spiritual renewal, and aligns emotions with principles and values. Careless intimacy, on the other hand, makes room for noise, confusion, and hasty choices. When you learn to be selective, something changes inside, and this emotional clarity paves the way for you to better see who really adds up and who just takes up space. No one wakes up one day determined to abandon their principles and values. This happens gradually, almost without realizing it, when you get used to environments and people that normalize what used to bother you. Bad companions are not only those that encourage obvious mistakes, but also those that weaken your faith, relativize choices, and make you doubt what was already clear in your heart. The danger is not only in what is said, but in what is repeated. Constant conversations of complaint, irony about the Christian life, or contempt for trust in God shape emotions and thoughts. When you realize it, you are already reacting differently to crises and injustices, with less hope and more harshness. A good thermometer is simple: observe if your decisions are becoming more in line with faith or more impulsive and defensive. Shielding the mind requires courage to walk away from certain circles, even if it hurts at first. Sometimes the distance is not physical, but emotional. Less exposure, less influence, less room for confusion. This care preserves emotional healing and strengthens perseverance, preparing you to recognize those who truly share the same vision of life and deserve to walk closer in the next stage. True friendship goes beyond affinity or time together. Close friends need to speak the same language when it comes to faith, principles, and values. It does not mean agreeing on everything, but walking in the same direction. When this does not happen, silent conflicts arise that affect emotions, decisions, and even the way you see God in difficult moments. People who share the same faith strengthen their trust in God on good days and, especially, on days of crisis. They do not feed revenge, they do not encourage justice by their own hands, nor do they reinforce the complaint. On the contrary, they help you take a deep breath, remember who you are and why you chose to live the Christian life. This type of friendship works as an emotional shelter when the world tightens. A practical tip is to observe who encourages you to grow and who only validates impulses. True close friends point the way, not just agree. They respect their limits, celebrate their new beginning, and understand that spiritual renewal is a process. When you surround yourself with these people, something changes in the way you face choices and consequences, preparing your heart for even deeper adjustments. One of the biggest sources of emotional frustration is placing expectations on people who are unable to support them. When this happens, disappointment is accompanied by hurt, demand, and often injustice in the heart. Faith begins to weaken not because God has failed, but because hope has been placed in the wrong place. Misdirected expectations always take a heavy emotional toll. People make mistakes, change, get confused, and sometimes they just can't deliver what they promised. When you understand this, you learn to love without demanding, to trust without idolizing, and to relate without losing focus. Putting hope in God does not mean closing yourself off, but adjusting the weight you place on others. This simple change protects your emotions and strengthens trust in God in times of pressure. A healthy practice is to turn expectations into prayer. Instead of demanding people, present your needs to God with sincerity and gratitude. This does not eliminate challenges, but it brings lightness to the heart and clarity to decisions. When you let go of control and deliver hope to the right place, something reorganizes itself inside, making room to better deal with words, attitudes, and situations that previously hurt more than they should. Complaining seems harmless, almost an automatic outburst, but in practice it is a silent thief of hope. Every time complaining becomes a habit, it trains the mind to see only what is missing, only what hurts, only what went wrong. Gradually, faith loses ground, focus disperses, and emotions get stuck in cycles of dissatisfaction that lead nowhere. In addition to weakening those who complain, complaining also contaminates the environment. Words loaded with pessimism affect those who listen, generate emotional weight, and spread discouragement. In the Christian life, this is even more serious. because the mouth reveals what governs the heart. A practical exercise is simple, but powerful. Before complaining, turn the phrase into gratitude or prayer. The internal effect changes almost immediately. This does not mean denying pain or pretending that everything is fine. It means choosing awareness over impulse. Gratitude does not erase problems, but it reorganizes emotions and strengthens trust in God. When you reduce complaints, you realize that there is room for clarity, perseverance, and decisions that are more aligned with your principles and values. And this change in language sets the stage for learning to deal with what you hear from others as well. Not all influence comes from within, a lot of things enter through the ears. When you give constant space to those who only complain, criticize, or see the negative side of everything, your focus begins to be hijacked without realizing it. Faith is still there, but it is drowned out by an excess of emotional noise. Listening too much to those who are always complaining is like trying to keep your mind clean walking in the dust. People who complain all the time tend to see crises and injustices as the end of the line, never as part of a process. If you're not mindful, you start to absorb that distorted gaze and react with fear, irritation, or discouragement. A simple practice is to filter conversations. Not everything deserves your full attention. Sometimes, changing the subject or limiting the exposure time already protects your peace. Shielding the mind also involves learning to listen wisely. You can listen without agreeing, welcome without absorbing, and help without carrying the weight of the other. When he does this, he preserves his emotions and keeps his trust in God active, even in difficult environments. This posture strengthens perseverance and creates internal space to face challenges more clearly, preparing the heart for the next learning. Many people get frustrated on the journey because they believe that faith is a shield against problems. When the crisis arrives, it comes with doubt, the feeling of injustice, and even the desire to give up. But the truth is, different. Faith does not annul struggles. It strengthens the heart to go through them without losing identity. This is where the Christian life ceases to be theory and becomes real experience. In difficult moments, emotions are on the surface and focus is tested. If trust in God is well taken care of, you do not react on impulse or seek revenge disguised as justice. Instead, he learns to breathe, reflect, and act wisely. A simple practice is to revisit biblical stories in times of crisis, such as Joseph, David, or Job, remembering that the process is also part of the purpose. Mature faith doesn't just ask why this is happening, but what can I learn here? This change in posture brings emotional healing, strengthens perseverance, and prevents suffering from defining who you are. Problems continue to exist, but they no longer govern their decisions. And when the heart gets stronger, you realize that you are ready for something new, something that points to a new beginning. Starting over is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of spiritual maturity. Everyone makes mistakes, stumbles, and, at some point, has to deal with choices and consequences. The difference is in those who get up sustained by the grace and love of God, without carrying eternal guilt. When you understand this, the past loses strength and the present gains new possibilities. The new beginning starts from within, in the way you talk to yourself. Instead of condemning yourself, learn to align yourself again with the faith, focus, and principles that brought you here. A simple exercise is to write down what is left behind and consciously surrender it to God in prayer. This symbolic gesture helps to release trapped emotions and make room for spiritual renewal. The Christian life is made up of cycles, not perfect lines. There will always be the chance to adjust routes, rebuild trust in God, and move on with more lightness. Starting over does not erase history, but re-signifies everything that has been lived. And when you accept this process with humility, you realize that there is still a lot to be built, step by step, from now on. Now I ask you, in all sincerity, what are you going to do with all this you just heard? Will you let these truths pass as another beautiful message, or will you use these next few days to adjust focus, emotions, and choices? In whom have you placed your hope? Who has access to your heart? What voices have you allowed to influence your faith, your peace, and your decisions? Perhaps today is the time to reduce people's expectations, silence complaints, shield the mind, and regain trust in God with more awareness. Small daily decisions generate big transformations over time. Starting over does not require perfection, it requires courage and perseverance. God's grace and love are already available, but it's up to you to take the next step. If this content spoke to you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and walk with us on more content that strengthens faith, organizes emotions, and helps you live the Christian life with more clarity, balance, and purpose.